Hey everyone, it is Wednesday, February 14th. You are listening to the Mo News Podcast. I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts. We read all of the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. As you could tell, it is just me today. Moshe is wrapping up his trip to Israel. If you have been following along on Instagram, you know he has been doing back-to-back interviews. So today I will be handling the podcast alone, and I cannot wait to talk to him about all of the interviews he's been doing and everybody that he has been talking with. But back to this podcast. Happy Valentine's Day, everybody. Americans expected to spend about $25.8 billion on the holiday this year. And that is actually down slightly from last year. And interestingly, after splurging on friends and coworkers last year, Americans are back to focusing on their partners. 35 to 44-year-olds are expected to spend the most, and pets are expected to make out pretty well also. And a reminder to everybody who has a dog, keep the Valentine's Day chocolate away. It can be very dangerous for them. All right, let's get to the news here. Something we haven't said in a while. A winter snowstorm has swept parts of the Northeast. To the Middle East, where things stand with new negotiations to release hostages in Gaza in exchange for a pause in fighting. On the COVID front, the CDC is planning to drop its 5-day COVID isolation guidelines, what they're recommending instead. If you are planning to take an Uber or a Lyft to your Valentine's Day dinner tonight, think again. Drivers are set to strike. To the economy, inflation is not going anywhere. What the data says about the prices we pay for everything from food to housing. And Super Bowl 58 breaking TV records. I have the numbers. And Tiger Woods out with a new lifestyle brand. Plus, I will do my best with On This Day in History. All right, Moshe is missing the biggest snowstorm in the New York City area in about 2 years. That isn't saying all that much, though. New York City and other major northeastern cities were on the receiving end of a strong and fast-moving nor'easter. The snow totals in New York City, just about 3.5 inches, enough to end the record drought of 744 consecutive days since 2 inches or more of snow has hit the city in a single day. Pennsylvania's Lehigh Valley, that's northwest of Philadelphia, got about 9 inches. That's the most snow they've gotten since 2021. On Long Island, where I live, some areas got about 8 inches, others less. Parts of New Jersey got more than a foot. In New Jersey, the governor says there were more than 250 car accidents and about 1,000 flights had been canceled in the New York City area and also Boston's Logan Airport. Now to the Middle East, where mediators once again trying to negotiate some type of agreement between Israel and Hamas that would free the remaining hostages in Gaza and stop the fighting for at least 6 weeks. President Biden sent CIA Director William Burns to join those talks in Egypt, also included the head of Israel's intelligence agency, the Mossad. Plus, there were leaders from Qatar and Egypt. National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby said the talks were, quote, moving in the right direction. He wouldn't give many details, though. But we have been here before, and so far, Israel and Hamas seem pretty far apart, at least in their public positions. As Kirby said, nothing is done until it is done. He was also asked about whether the U.S. thinks that the Americans who were taken hostage in Gaza are still alive, and he said that they do not have any information to the contrary. As Moshe and I have been reporting, Israel just rescued 2 hostages from an apartment in Rafah. That is a city in Gaza on the southern border with Egypt, and there is still a lot of concern from the United States, the United Nations, and the international community about a full-scale Israeli advance into Rafah. Egypt is refusing to open its border to Palestinians to give them a safe haven from the fighting. There are about 1.4 million Palestinians crammed into Rafah right now. Many are in tents and without enough food and water. And many of them have already fled from other areas of Gaza. Israel has said it is working on an evacuation plan. Palestinians say that nowhere feels like it's safe. And as far as sending American aid to the region, the Senate passed a $95.3 billion aid bill early Tuesday morning. 22 Republicans voted with nearly all Democrats to pass that package, 70 to 29. So the bill includes about $60 billion in aid for Ukraine in its fight against Russia, about $14 billion in security assistance for Israel, $9 billion in humanitarian assistance in Gaza and other areas, and about $5 billion to support regional partners in the Indo-Pacific region like Taiwan. President Biden then called on House Republicans to urgently bring that package to a vote. In a speech Tuesday, he warned that refusal to take up the bill would be, quote, playing into Putin's hands. Biden says Ukrainian soldiers are out of artillery shells and are rationing ammunition. But now the fate of this bill rests in the House, and Speaker Mike Johnson not really looking like he's going to bring that bill to a vote. One thing to mention, and this is an argument that I heard one analyst making on Tuesday, a lot of this aid money gets pumped right back into the U.S. economy. It goes to U.S. companies who make the weapons that get sent to Ukraine. So it isn't like the U.S. is writing a check for $60 billion and handing it over. So we shall see. This is actually a scaled back version of the bill that we were talking about for the past couple of weeks. That was a bipartisan Senate bill that included more money for border security here in the U.S., along with other changes to help make the U.S. border with Mexico more secure. House Republicans, though, had said that the bill was basically dead on arrival. That is after they said that they wouldn't send aid to Ukraine until there was more action around securing the U.S.-Mexico border. But once they saw that bipartisan Senate bill, they said it didn't go far enough. They said that wasn't going to pass either. So again, here is an aid package with just the foreign aid and without anything having to do with beefing up security at the border. Time now for the speed read from the Washington Post. Americans who test positive for the coronavirus no longer need to routinely stay home from work and school for 5 days under new guidance planned by the CDC. The agency is loosening its COVID isolation recommendations for the first time since 2021 to align it with guidance on how to avoid transmitting the flu and RSV. This is according to agency officials. The CDC acknowledges how much the COVID-19 landscape has changed since the virus first emerged 4 years ago. It has killed nearly 1.2 million people in the United States. The new reality, they say, is that most people have developed a level of immunity to the virus because of prior infection or vaccination. So the CDC plans to recommend that people who test positive for COVID use clinical symptoms to determine when to end isolation. Under the new approach, people would no longer need to stay home if they've been fever-free for at least 24 hours without the aid of medication, and if their symptoms are mild and improving. Some are opposed to this and say public health officials still need to treat COVID differently from other respiratory viruses because it is deadlier than the flu and it does increase the risk of long-term complications or long COVID. From NBC News, thousands of drivers for ride-sharing platforms Uber, Lyft, and food delivery app DoorDash will strike across the United States on Valentine's Day, seeking fair pay. The strike call is the first since Uber and Lyft went public in 2019. Drivers will picket outside of airports and Uber offices. The strikes are set to take place about a week after Lyft said that it would pay the difference if drivers made less than 70% of what riders paid after external fees each week. One driver in Texas said, by not paying drivers a livable wage, drivers are barely able to afford the bare necessities. While many drivers sign up with these firms to supplement their income from other jobs, some drive full-time as their main job. The president of a rideshare union in California says a year into algorithmic pricing, drivers have seen incredible decrease of pay. Whatever calculations and algorithms they are using, it is absolutely useless. In 2023, Uber drivers' monthly average earnings fell by about 17%. Lyft drivers apparently increased about 2.5%. Uber says drivers' earnings remain strong, and as of the end of 2023, drivers in the U.S. were making about $33 per utilized hour, adding that most of its drivers were satisfied with what they earned. From CNBC, inflation rose more than expected in January as stubbornly high prices from housing weighed on consumers. This is according to a new report from the Labor Department. The Consumer Price Index, which measures the prices that shoppers face for goods and services across the economy, increased 0.3% for the month. On a yearly basis, that came out to a 3.1% increase, higher than economists had expected. Housing prices or rent prices, which comprised about a third of the CPI, accounted for the biggest increase. Food prices, no surprise, also up. Notably, ham prices fell. But the price of eggs jumped more than 3%. Energy helped to offset some of the increases, mostly because gas prices, if you've noticed, are a bit lower. One economist tells CNBC inflation is generally moving in the right direction, but it's important to remember that a lower inflation rate does not mean that prices of most things are falling. Rather, it simply means that prices are rising more slowly. Consumers are still feeling the pinch of higher prices for the things that they buy most often. The big question now, what does this mean for Fed policy? Markets have been looking for aggressive interest rate cuts, but policymakers have been more cautious. I want to mention the markets took a nosedive on Tuesday after this data came out. One analyst says across the board, the numbers were hotter than expected, making certain that the Fed will need more data before deciding to cut rates. From Bloomberg, Paramount Global is letting go of hundreds of workers days after the company's coverage of the Super Bowl set a record for the most watched program in U.S. television history. I'll have a bit more on that in a minute. The company is eliminating about 800 jobs, or about 3% of its workforce. Paramount Plus, the company's own online TV service, is not profitable. Attendance at movie theaters has not recovered to pre-pandemic levels, putting pressure on the company's namesake film studio as well. The owner of CBS, Nickelodeon, and other channels trying to boost profits at a time when viewers are canceling cable and satellite TV packages in favor of streaming services like Netflix. From ESPN, the longest Super Bowl game will also go down as the most watched program in TV history. According to Nielsen and Adobe Analytics, the Kansas City Chiefs' overtime victory against the San Francisco 49ers on Sunday averaged 123.4 million viewers across TV and streaming platforms. That shattered last year's mark of 115.1 million. The game was televised by CBS, Nickelodeon, and Univision and streamed on Paramount Plus. Some of the increase could be attributed to a change in the way viewers are counted. Nielsen started to include out-of-home viewers in its ratings back in 2020, but only from limited markets, and that measure expanded to all 50 states starting this year. Sunday's game was only the second of the 58 Super Bowls to go into overtime. Plus, it had the added attraction of Taylor Swift in attendance. Of course, the pop star is dating Chiefs tight end Travis Kelce, a romance that has brought new fans to the NFL. With all those eyeballs, some have questioned if it was a mistake for President Biden to once again skip the traditional Super Bowl Sunday interview. It is a decision, though, that his camp is defending. Back to the popularity of the Super Bowl, CNN points out it is even more impressive because, broadly speaking, the entire industry is in decline. Millions of people cut the cord each year, trading in traditional one-size-fits-all cable packages for a la carte streaming offerings. But the NFL is different. Instead of seeing its audience dwindle and taper off, the sports media powerhouse appears immune to those forceful industry trends, which have wreaked havoc on pretty much everyone else. Notably, the NFL has managed to pull this off while its other two big counterparts in sports have not. They're talking about the NBA and the MLB, which still command sizable live audiences, but viewership has slid considerably in recent years. And then last week, the Pew Research Center reported that more than half of Americans now believe football is America's sport, more than twice as many of those who had said baseball. And finally, this from CNN as well. Tiger Woods has found a new look after splitting up with Nike, his longtime partner, last month. This week, Woods announced that he would be partnering with TaylorMade to launch a new apparel brand, Sunday Red. A landing page on the Sunday Red website teases that the line is coming on May 1st, and a news release says the brand plans to expand to include women's and children's styles as well as footwear. All right, time for On This Day in History. On this day in 1946, the first general-purpose, high-speed electronic digital computer, known as the Electronic Numerical Integrator and Computer, was demonstrated to the public by its creators, J. Presper Eckert and John Mauchly. On this day in 1989, Ayatollah Khomeini of Iran issued a fatwa and offered a bounty for the assassination of author Salman Rushdie, whose novel, The Satanic Verses, Khomeini had said that Rushdie's novel, The Satanic Verses, was blasphemous. On this day in 1991, the psychological thriller The Silence of the Lambs was released in American theaters. Widely regarded as a classic, it won 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Actor, Anthony Hopkins, Jodie Foster for Best Actress, and Director, Jonathan Demme. And finally, on this day in 2005, YouTube was launched by 3 former employees of PayPal. It is the most popular site currently for American teens, with 90% using it. And hard as I try to keep my 5.5-year-old off of YouTube, it is a losing battle. And speaking of people that you love and my 5.5-year-old, she just walked into my office right now and wants to thank you for listening live and in person. Take it away, Alex.
Thanks for listening to the Mo News Podcast. Happy Valentine's Day.